This call out still gives me nightmares, and I can still smell the fucking place. Major and violent crimes are not, or at least weren't, that common where I was. Very rarely would things escalate beyond the average bar fight or family reunion brawl. We did get a couple murders a year, maybe a kidnapping. Lots and lots of plain, simple disappearing. The disappearances were usually chalked up to foolishly getting lost off the walking trails and not being able to find their way back out. We tried, every single time we tried to find them. Many manhunts and search parties went out. Never once did we find them alive. Sometimes we didn't even find bodies. Then sometimes we would find bodies, without getting to know where they came from. It was the summer of '79, and I was on duty on a Monday morning, still feeling the earth-shattering effects of my massive hangover. The Friday prior, I'd pulled over a vehicle transporting 12 quart jars of straight moonshine. That wasn't good, as we were in a dry county. So the perpetrator and I came up with a solution. Since she was young, had a child, and no husband, she was doing whatever she could to earn some extra cash, including run moonshine for some nasty people. Between the two of us, we hatched a plan. I'd keep the liquor and actually pay for it. She'd take the money back to the Shiner, and me and 3 other cruisers would storm the place, claiming to have seen them load the shine, and know who bought it. No heat landed on the girl, and she became my house cleaner for many years after that. I made the mistake that first weekend to test the shine. Never again did I drink straight corn liquor without proofing it down. I was sitting at my desk in the courthouse, sweating through my uniform, desperate to get away to cool down. The building wasn't air-conditioned at the time, and the only way we had to keep cool was a tiny desk fan on our desks. They made lots of noise, but they didn't move a lot of air. So when my phone actually rang, I was a little excited and hoping I'd have an excuse to take a drive. The call was a distress call from a young woman. She reported being able to smell death and rot from her neighbor's home, and reported she hadn't seen the neighbors for several days. The caller reported the neighbors to be an elderly couple. She asked if I could do a welfare check, because she couldn't get them to answer the door or the phone. I agreed and informed dispatch I was rolling to a WC scene, and asked to have EMS on standby, just in case. In my experience, the vast majority of these calls were overly cautious friends and family, and the people being checked on were usually fine. Sometimes folks take vacations, and not telling the neighborhood was considered security. Simpler times. I jumped into my cruiser and flipped the lights on and siren too, mainly so I could actually drive fast enough to get a good strong breeze in the car. It didn't take me long to reach the address I'd been given. The house was old and decrepit, needing many repairs, but still habitable. As I approached the domicile, I noted the smell of death. I could tell instantly that I wasn't smelling a dead pet or even a dead deer. I was smelling a deceased human being. I radioed to dispatch, telling them to alert the EMS and the county coroner. Also told her to send another car with a detective. I informed dispatch I was entering the home and ended the transmission. I knocked loudly, using my mag light to beat against the front door. I cut my hands around my face, trying to peer inside, but the windows appeared to be painted, and I couldn't see through them. Thinking nothing of it, I proceeded to check the other windows for a line of sight into the home, and found them covered or painted like the rest. I made my way to the back side of the house, looking for an unlocked door or window, or even the cellar being open. I was met with locks, drapes, and brown paint on every possible point of entry. By the time I came to the rotten back porch, the smell was nearly a physical being. I could almost reach out and touch it. I remembered the peppermint oil that the coroner gave us and ran to my cruiser to get it. As I applied a very generous glob to my upper lip and nostrils, I radioed dispatch to check the progress of the coroner's arrival, and that of the backup I had just requested. I was assured they all should be arriving in short time. I decided to enter the house via the rear door just in case I was badly wrong about what I expected to find inside. That way we could try to ensure nobody burglarized the home after we left. I mule-kicked the old wooden door just under the knob, twice before the door jamb shattered. It swung open and violently hit the wall behind it. The smell rolled out of the house as a sticky wet fog of nasty. The peppermint oil was now doing fuck all to help the stench. As my eyes watered and adjusted to the dim light inside the home, I noticed a sound. A constant droning noise. I knew that I knew the sound, but at the moment my hangover was truly kicking my ass, and my brain was in a deep fog. I made my way through the door and into the small, cramped utility room. I made my way into the next room, which turned out to be the kitchen. I was using my flashlight to look around and felt something warm and wet plop on the back of my neck, followed by the intense smell of rot and human shit. I knew what it was, but my hand had a mind of its own and swept the nasty glob off my neck. I tried to fling the stuff off my finger as well as I could as the realization of what the stuff was hit me. Putrescine and scatoli, two chemicals produced when a body decomposes. Gagging and fighting back bile, I staggered into the dining room where the noise I mentioned seemed to originate. Through teary eyes, I looked around the room and almost wept when I saw the source of the noise. What had to be millions of flies and beetles covered everything inside the dining room. The ceiling was moving and fluttering, and although it took me a second, I realized the flies and bugs was what had the windows covered. They were so dense I couldn't see through them. As I stepped through the doorway, the covering of bugs shifted out of my way. The few remaining in place squished audibly underfoot. As they shifted and moved, I realized why they were covering everything. The walls, ceiling, and floor of the dining room were covered in blood and viscera. I could see intestines smeared across the dining table, fecal matter oozing out in a streak of greenish brown. The walls were completely covered, as if someone took a bit of time to paint the walls with the blood and fluids from their victims. I carefully made my way through the room, impervious to the sounds emanating from under my feet. The living room was attached to the dining room, and was absolutely spotless. Not a drop of blood or anything to indicate the nightmare in the other room. The stairwell, which would lead to the bedrooms, was in one corner of the living room. I carefully made my way to the front door, unlocking it from my backup in the corner. I tried to radio dispatch, but my portable wouldn't reach out. It was only receiving static. I carefully ascended the steps, making my way upstairs. At the top of the landing was 3 doors. One directly in front of me, one to the left, and one to the right. I entered the door directly in front of me first. It must have been the spare bedroom at one point. Now, however, it was a macabre storage room for bones, cartilage, and other hard bits. I backed out of the room and vomited in the hall. I could no longer fight the odorous sights or my hangover at that time. After copious amounts of vomiting, I decided to try the left-hand side door. I slowly opened the door and peeked in. This room must have been the killer's organ room, because I discovered several pairs of lungs, all different sizes. There were 4 brains that I saw before I backed out and closed the door. Key the second round of seemingly endless vomit escaping my throat at Mach 3. The door on the right, the door that chose the title to this story, nearly 40 years later. I slowly opened the door, weapon drawn, more for my own comfort than any protection, and as the door opened, I got a glimpse into Hell's true kitchen. Human bodies, minus the skin and bones, were stapled to the walls and floor as well as to the ceiling fan. I counted 7 bodies before I had to leave. I was sitting on the front stoop, again given control of my stomach to the hellish hangover, when my backup and county coroner arrived. I couldn't speak, so I just raised a shaking finger and pointed into the house. I remember feeling lightheaded and then hearing the detective, a 20-year cop, scream like a girl before I passed out. I awoke some hours later, laying on a bed in the town's doctor's office. I sat up and made my way out to the front, where I found the detective, the coroner, the mayor, and several other local officials. As I walked into the lobby, the coroner, who was also the town doctor, turned to me and asked how I felt. "Well, Doc, I really don't know, to be honest," I answered, not wanting to broadcast my terrible hangover. "Aw, son, you'll be right as rain once you get home and take a few drinks. Or wait around, you can sample my collection," he whispered in a joking manner. I nervously laughed and nodded, having no intentions of hanging around any longer than I needed to. I walked around and mingled for a moment before I went back to the coroner and asked what he thought of the house. "Well, son, I'll tell you, I ain't never seen nothing like it. Count 11 different corpses. No obvious cause of death to them either. And the downstairs room? Whew, that place was coated in, my best guess, a mixture of pureed skin, fat, and bodily fluid. I fought back another surge of bile before seeking my sergeant out of the crowd and asking to leave early that day. Of course, after what had happened, he agreed, under the condition I had my report ready by 9 in the morning, and on his desk. That night I had the first dream. I was stumbling through an unfamiliar house. It was dark, hot, and damp, every surface coated in a thick visceral fluid. I stumble through a cramped hallway and finally find a light switch. I flip the switch and scream. The entire house is made of meat. I can see veins and arteries pumping a dark brown blood through the walls. I see that the light is spilling forth from a chandelier made of human skulls. I try to run from the house to escape, but there's no door. I try to run at the walls to crash through. Each time I hit the wall with a sickening splorch and bounce back. Every time I run to the opposite side of the house, trying to find a door. Instead I find what can only be described as King Kong's sphincter grown into the wall. Part of my brain tries to tell me that I'll have to crawl through that giant pulsating asshole to escape this place, but another part of me thinks it's a trap. I frantically look around for something to use to stab the walls, and I see a bone growing up the wall. With a lot of effort and an unforgettable sound, the bone wrests free. I hold it like a spear and run at the wall, stabbing the meat house. I hear and feel an incredibly deep rumble, and am thrown backwards as the wall leaps forward, spitting the bone back to the floor. With a dribble of brown blood, the wall seals the puncture wound. Desperate to escape, I stab against the sphincter with the same bone I tore from the wall. With another deep rumble, I'm slammed back. Not against the wall, but back in the room with the skull lights. That's when I wake up screaming hard enough to taste blood. Next morning, after turning in my report, the sergeant drags me to his office where he tells me the following. Look, we have a problem. If we tell the public what happened there, or hell, even what we found, locals would panic. We'd have drunk rednecks running around all vigilante. We have to keep this covered up. The house has been condemned. The coroner manages to come up with a good enough cover for the barrels of nasty ass shit we have to take out of there, and the smell. Apparently the owners of the home died in their sleep, and the pets died shortly after, because of a gas leak. As soon as the investigation is done, we'll burn it down. Officially, it's going to be an accidental death for both of the residents. The doc is going to try and use dental records to identify the others, but he's not optimistic. Just remember the cover, and don't talk to anyone except me, Detective Lawson, or the doc. And that's what the papers said the following day. Officially, it was an accidental death caused by an unchecked gas leak in the kitchen. Unofficially, we discovered a total of 13 bodies. None of them showed a cause of death. There's no foreign chemicals in the blood or body parts. Using every tool available to us, we're unable to identify any of the bodies. The homeowners were put to rest in a sealed, empty coffin. We had access to the database of the feds for an unrelated matter, and still couldn't find the identity to either of the bodies. That's that. We never figured out what happened there, and it never happened again. I still have that nightmare, or a twisted version of it, at least twice a month. There's more to come. Just bear with me, y'all.